This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. I am sat here once again with Professor Robert Gordon. Hello, Robert.
Hello, Nick.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Also joining us is Dr. Olaf Ubeen. You're from Regency University, aren't you, in
Yes,
London?
Regency University, London. Hello, Nick.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Now, you two just... we talked briefly last week about Something Rotten. The show, Something Rotten, was Something Rotten, and this week we're going to talk more about... stuff that you've seen. You've got a whole load of playbills on the table, so we're going to have
What's rotten in New York? I don't think that at the moment I wouldn't rate the state of Broadway as very, very healthy. I think actually, and this is an argument I've had recently at the a seminar on the state of British theatre, actually British musical theatre, that I've actually made the point that we tend to rubbish our own stuff in Britain quite a lot and praise whatever comes from New York. And I think that's slightly misleading, because when you actually go to Broadway, you see there may be a few very interesting developments on and off Broadway, but a lot of the shows on Broadway are really not even as good as some of the shows in London. And I think that therefore there's no reason for Broadway and the West End to compete, but equally there's no reason to rubbish the West End because we've got this spurious notion that Broadway is so wonderful. But let Olaf talk a bit about...
Well, the grass is always greener, isn't it? You know,
yes.
the Americans are always saying, you know, I want to come to London, you guys are do the best plays in the world, yet we do the best musicals in the world. I think we're both as good as each other, aren't we?
Yes, and I think one of the big problems that you have with Broadway at the moment is the production circumstances, with shows costing as much as they do, up to $20 million. We're not talking about Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark with its $19 million dollar budget or whatever that was, but just on average, $15 to $20 million. That is an enormous amount of money that most people simply do not have. You no longer have producers who are willing to spend that amount of money on a show that isn't in any way fail-proof. And so where do they go with something that needs to be fail-proof? Well, they go to property that is well-known, meaning that you either have producers like Disney, DreamWorks, Universal, big film companies who are just exploiting their back catalogue, which can result in good shows, but more often than not does not. And you have a list, or you have musicals with a list of 40, 50 producers.
I'm just counting now the producers of An American in Paris. I'll get back to you in 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, with An American in Paris, you have the one example of a show where this actually worked. Now, there might be shows where this works, but more often than not, what you see on Broadway, and you see it also in the West End, let's be honest, there's a lot of shows that are just put up there because people already know the title. It's a brand that makes it very difficult, for new cutting-edge shows, dangerous shows, daring shows, or shows for young, unknown composers, lyricists, and performers to make
39 producers, and some of those are producing groups.
Yeah.
But it has to be said, Olaf, I think as well, that, for example, An American in Paris doesn't really originate on Broadway. It originates and also the first performance was at the Théâtre du Châtelet in Paris. So, and of course, the director-choreographer is a young choreographer who is the chief choreographer at the British Royal Ballet, Pittsburgh. So you could say it originates in Paris and Pittsburgh with an English director choreographer. Now, you know, okay, we're in the age of global theatre, but the thing that interests me about that is if the best show is not really produced by the 35 people who put up the money, 39, sorry, but by the Théâtre du Châtelet in Paris and a theatre in Pittsburgh. Is that a Broadway? You know, is that originated on Broadway? Or
when did it open on Broadway?
Just a couple of weeks ago.
Or the first initial production.
The first initial production was a year ago at the Théâtre du Châtelet.
Yeah, it was in France.
I thought it was an older show than that.
No, it's of course based on the very famous 1951 film by Vincent Minnelli that won the Oscar for Best Movie of the Year. But the clever thing about An American in Paris is that it takes the movie and does not try to restage it or put it one-to-one on stage.
Which you can't do, because that
you can't do. It's always the problem when you have a show like Singing in the Rain, as much fun as it is on stage. Yes, but with Singing in the Rain, you always have the problem that you see it, and even if it's well performed and a lot of fun, like the recent revival here in London with Adam Cooper, you still feel, well, I've seen it all done better on film. You have Gene Kelly, you have Debbie Reynolds, you have all those great performers, you have the full machinery of Hollywood. You can't compete with that on stage, and An American in Paris doesn't try. It has a basic setup that is similar in story. It has a book by Craig Lucas, who takes those basic tropes and then sort of shuffles them around a little bit, coming up with some unusual development, taking advantage of the fact that it's set in Paris immediately after the war, using a lot of the great Gershwin tunes and using a couple of ones that weren't in the original film.
So it's much like Mary Poppins when they brought that to...
It's sort of a reimagining, a rethinking that takes some of the elements but then gives them a new spin.
But even more than Mary Poppins, they changed the book quite radically, so you wouldn't recognise the story from the original.
The basic setup, but not the details. Yeah. And you can actually see how interesting it is by the fact that it uses an up-and-coming, if you want to call him that, choreographer from the world of ballet. It has ballet stars as the lead performers who can sing well enough and have charm to spare. It also has probably the most interesting set that you see on Broadway by Bob Crowley, and has done some great things in the past.
And Aida.
I wasn't that keen on his set for Love Never Dies, and the less said about Tarzan's set, the better. I'm not quite sure it works all the time. It's very busy, but it has clearly an artistic impetus, and the biggest surprise to me was how they did the famous American in Paris ballet, which they take back to the Ballet Russe and the work that they've done there with great designers such as Salvador Dali and Picasso. And so you have, instead of restaging the wonderful famous 17-minute ballet from the Gene Kelly film, you have something completely different with abstract designs, different choreography. It's stunning.
I think the use of projections is brilliant.
I was just about to ask, I bet there's projections.
Yeah, the use of projections is brilliant, and also because the director is a choreographer, he's worked out the choreography in relation to the projections, and that's what makes it so beautiful. The other thing is, you will not see such sophisticated choreography or dancing on Broadway as you see in this, because the Robert Fairchild, who plays the Gene Kelly part, he's not Gene Kelly, but in a way he's technically a better dancer than Gene Kelly. He is a principal dancer at the New York City Ballet, the great Balanchine company. So his dancing is impeccable. The surprise is that his singing and acting is very good. Leanne Cope is a principal ballerina at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, and her dancing is superb. She doesn't really have to act and sing outside of the scope of the ballet sequences very much, but she's good at whatever she does. Yeah. Jill Pace is in it. She's delightful.
I like Jill Pace.
Yes, she's delightful, and
she made Gone with the Wind bearable.
Yes, not her fault that it flopped. She takes, with the help of book writer Craig Lucas, she takes a rather nasty, unlikable character in the movie Milo, the rich American art sponsor, and turns her into a really interesting character. She could have had more to sing for my taste because she's such a great voice, but she looks stunning. Everyone else does. The costumes by Bob Crowley are amazing, and they all do justice to the great songs by Gershwin.
I haven't seen it. I know very little about it, but my one bugbear about this is, haven't there been so many new Gershwin musicals? I mean, for someone who's dead, he's pretty impressive. He's still cranking these shows out.
Yes, but on the other hand, you could argue that, of course, certain songs that you have in An American Paris, you also had in
Crazy for You.
Crazy for You, for instance.
And there was another one as well recently.
You wonder what will come, what will be used in the new in inverted commas musical Damsel in Distress, A Damsel in Distress at Chichester, which is also based by a film score.
And what was the one a couple of years ago on Broadway?
Nice Work If You Can Get It.
So there was that one as well.
So-
I mean, do you see? It just,
Yes, but of course, this is way more sophisticated than either of the other two. Much as I like Crazy for You, it's a very simple reworking of
Girl Crazy.
Girl Crazy. A Nice Work If You Can Get It, I didn't see, but I heard that it was rather opportunistically put together to make use of
The cast recording doesn't work.
Gershwin's back catalogue. This is actually not just Gershwin's back catalogue. It's taking what was a masterpiece as a film and rethinking it totally so that some of the themes are there, most of the music is there, plus some is added. But it's not done opportunistically. It's done to create a genuinely new musical. The only thing that's old is it's a Gershwin score. So you could say it's a brilliant jukebox musical.
Yes, you could argue that it's a jukebox musical.
Well,
But
Crazy for You is a jukebox
yes,
musical.
in many ways it is. But I
Or
would
sheet music trunk musical, I guess would be the technical term.
But I would argue that this is, for me, the one new Broadway musical that you come out floating on air. It's that good. It's so enchanting.
I thought Finding Neverland would be that for you, Ola.
No, not quite. Having seen it in Boston, the less said about that, the better. But it really manages to give you the feeling that this is what used to be the staple of Broadway. Those shows that are artistically challenging, beautifully performed, great music, and wonderful just to watch. You come out feeling happy.
And great dancing. The thing we always used to admire so much about a Broadway show when it came to London was how brilliant the dancing was.
But I mean, Broadway seems to me to be very tired. I mean, even American in Paris on the 20th century, Something Rotten. That they all seem to be stuck in the 50s.
They are a bit retro.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, you have to differentiate between revivals, like on the 20th century, which, after all, is a musical that hasn't been done on Broadway for nearly 40 years, and on the Town,
since
which
the 20th century.
True. And on the Town and other revivals
Gigi.
that try to find new
Gigi.
things. But Gigi is also a reimagining. It obviously hasn't worked, as according to most of the critics who say it's
But it
just
is a
whitewash.
revisal.
It's a revisal, but nonetheless, there's nothing wrong with having a look at something and trying to find new life in it.
I've never heard that term, a revisal.
But what I find more problematic are the new shows. Robert already has spoken about Something Rotten, which is advertised as a combination of the producers, a Spamalot, a Book of Mormon.
Every comedy show since
Yes,
2001.
and you can actually sit there and every single song reminds you of a song in those shows because they've actually copied all of those shows. Something Rotten could have been written by a 12-year-old who has just heard 3 quotations of Shakespeare in his or her life. And that's the thing that I found. I didn't find the songs bad. They were, to me, rather undistinguished. It's
Generic.
a general generic, but not in an unpleasant way. It's just that I thought the storyline, the way they use Shakespeare, was bad. The
clumsiness of the set.
The staging was run of the mill. The performers, except for Brian Darcy James, does a good job. Christian Ball does a good job, even if he is copying Tim Curry. But most of the performers are way over the top. They're talented but badly directed, and you just think this is not anything that inspires confidence. It's not anything that makes you say, I have to see this again. There is such a fear of not giving you something that you've seen before. And I think this fear is even bigger on Broadway because the costs are so much higher. I think that it was said that Billy Elliot in London cost about £3 million, which is a lot of money, but on Broadway it costs $60 million. Of course, the stakes are that much higher, and so people are far more afraid of not giving you something that they've tried out before.
The show I want to hear most about that I'm really interested in is Fun Home.
I have to admit, first of all, that I'm not a fan of Janine Tesori. It's, to me, a little bit unfortunate. The one female composer who has a lot of shows going on is Janine Tesori, who, to my mind, isn't that interesting as a composer.
She's not the best female composer in New York either.
No, but she's the one who has most of the shows coming on, and I'm quite sure she will the Tony Award for this. She has paid her dues. It's finally her turn. Now, what makes Fun Home interesting is that it is probably the first show that has, in New York, that has a lesbian character at the center. There have been countless shows that are camp, that have a gay sensibility, that feature gay characters.
And the odd lesbian.
And the odd lesbian in a supporting role, but this is based on the graphic novel by Alison Bechdel, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that name, and it is an interesting attempt to combine different approaches to musical theatre. So you have 3 adolescents on stage. You have the adult looking back at her life as she's writing the graphic novel. You have the young girl growing up with two brothers in a home that was very unusual, as her father ran a funeral parlor, apart from also teaching at the local high school. And you have the teenage adolescent going to university and discovering her sexuality for the first time.
It sounds like Next to Normal meets Caroline or Change.
Yes, there are elements of that there, but it is done with a lot of sincerity. It has an interesting book and very clever lyrics.
Well staged.
And it's very well staged in the round, in the theatre circle in the round. You're surrounding it.
And brilliantly performed.
It has a fantastic cast. The three Allisons are standouts, all three of them.
Judy Kuhn,
playing the mother, is as usual impeccable. Michael Severus plays the father. Well, here you have the gay element, because the father is a closeted gay man who at the end commits suicide by stepping in front of a truck. It's done without an interval. It has some
But it's
fun
still
sequences.
$170, isn't it?
It's a little less, because Circle in the Round isn't that big a theatre, but of course it is expensive. All the shows in New York are expensive, but you come out and you feel you have seen something new, and you
come out humming the lyrics.
Yeah. Well, you definitely do not come out humming the songs, I'm afraid.
The problem I have with Jeanine Tesori is she takes everything far too seriously.
The problem that I have is that, I know this is a cliche, is that she can't write melodies. There's not one song of Shrek that I remember, having seen it twice.
And there's certainly not one song in this show that you remember.
No.
Perhaps Judy Kuhn's song.
Yes. Well, you remember the lyrics and the situation, because there's a very funny song where the children pretend to shoot
This one
a
only
video.
has 20 producers.
Well, there you go.
So
it's a smaller show. It's only 90 minutes, so maybe that explains it. But you come out having the feeling that this was done with people who really had an idea and were really concerned about what they wanted to do, and it's honest, and it's
well, it did
heartfelt.
start, didn't it, at the Public
Yes.
Theatre? So
the producers, the setters, and everyone gave it a best shot. It's small scale, it doesn't have that many set pieces. It's only 90 minutes, has a small cast, but it's something we say, well, I don't think it's a great work of art, but then I don't think Next to Normal is a great work of art either. But it is something that you really respect for its intentions and how well a lot of it has been realised.
I'd say it's an intelligent entertainment.
you almost picture it being something the National would bring over if they were to keep doing that trend of importing.
That would be a good thing for the National, or a smaller theatre.
Or the Playhouse Theatre.
The Playhouse.
I think it's much more successful in this respect than Caroline or Change. I mean, I found, you see, I have to say, I found the National's choice very bizarre. I understood why they did it. But I think that the problem with Caroline or Change, which was also Jeanine Tesori who wrote the music, is there is a huge mismatch between the music and the book and lyrics. And the book and lyrics are not written by someone, I mean, great writer, great playwright though he is.
George C. Wolfe.
No, that was the director. It was Tony Kushner.
Tony Kushner is
And
not really a musical theatre book writer. And the thing is that this is written by people who do know how to write the book for a musical.
And with the Caroline or Change had too many themes, wanted too much, and in the end I felt was just trying to create a work of art without quite knowing how. And
this show knows its limitations.
It in a way it doesn't try for too much. It wants to do a certain smaller story which has huge implications in a charming small-scale way, which is exactly right for the topic. It's not one of those shows where you think, well, they might as well have just done it with two people on an empty stage. You don't need it to have all the scenes. They don't do this. Yeah. They keep it small-scale, therefore I think they really succeed in what they're setting out to do.
It was also the right size for the theatre we saw it in.
It had, once again, what you can say, even though there were some productions in New York I didn't enjoy, the general level of talent in the performers is incredibly good. They may not always been well directed, and I think on the 20th Century is one example where not the leads, but most of the ensemble is mugging from beginning to end because they have been told this is funny, and unfortunately it isn't. Also, it's a show where the set and design everything.
Well, the show can be very funny, but the mugging wasn't.
No. And you think that's not necessary. It's once again directors being afraid that audiences will not find it entertaining and will not tell their friends to also spend $150 or $167, or if you are lucky and sit at the very last row, maybe $45. It still is an enormous amount of money.
It is. Especially when there's two of you.
Well, we got, most of the time, we got so-called half-price or discounted tickets, and the discounted tickets are $120, and that's rather shocking.
Yeah. And of course, think about it if you take your family. Let's say if you have 3 children, or you take your grandmother or whatever. That already then means you have to pay more than $700, something like that, depending on where you want to sit. And of course, that's not it. You want, maybe you want a T-shirt. Maybe the kids would like a souvenir brochure, a drink, definitely, at the interval, anything that is there. And of
you
course,
need to get your something rotten hat.
Yes, of course.
Well, you can see why the household income of the average theatre goer on Broadway is, what is it,
$224,000 a year.
Because unless you're earning that, you
that's
can't.
like 3 shows.
Yeah, you can't. Well, unless you're earning at least that.
I mean,
you
here
can't afford these tickets.
I'm shocked that tickets for Matilda on a Friday and Saturday night are now £122.50.
Well, I didn't know that. I just realised that
they've shot up the premium.
The Old Vic has now top price tickets for High Society, a show that nobody has been waiting for. Even though it has a great cast, great director, and some great songs, but it's never been a favourite musical of anyone. Is £90, and you just think the Old Vic is putting on a musical sort of as its last act. It's not, the big West End production.
Until it puts on all musicals when Matthew Watches takes over.
And you just think, well, why do they charge £90?
I think this is something that's very important, Nick, and perhaps the podcast can be a useful way of starting a bit of a campaign. I think
we put the camp into campaigns on this show.
We put the camp into a campaign, but I think Broadway theatre prices are outrageous. But I also think that London, by following suit, is going to price musical theatre particularly out of the market. And I think that producers should be pressured into keeping seat prices lower. And I think the public should refuse to pay those prices and not pay them. Now, there are going to be very, very super rich people who are going to pay those prices, but the average theatre goer in London, I think the survey was that the average
theatre income is about £30,000 to £35,000.
That's very different from $224,000. So I think if people are earning £30,000 to £35,000 and they are being expected to pay £120 for a good seat, you've priced them out.
Not for a good seat, for the best seats. I think
the best seats.
There's a difference between...
Yes. Well, there are premium seats now.
Which I hate.
Well, there are good seats.
I mean, my argument for premium seating is, fine, £122.50 for Matilda, you're going to get a good show. Give me a free programme, a free drink, and an ice cream included in that price, because that adds to the premium.
But even then, the souvenir brochure is probably £6, an ice cream.
Yeah, but you still feel you still feel you're getting something, as opposed to the guy.
I actually don't care what they give you.
As opposed to the guy next to you who's paid £67, who's seeing the exact same view. But I'm in my premium seats. Or make them leather, or do something.
I'm opposed to that kind of elitism anyway. I actually think theatre is there for people. I understand that this is a capitalist society and we need to make money and we need to break even. But I think theatre in general would be so much more successful in this country if seat prices were a bit lower. Yeah. Because I think that we are a theatre going culture. We have a huge tourist industry, and the very fact that so many tourists go to the half-price ticket booth shows that people are willing to pay a reasonable price.
But sometimes tickets are more expensive than they are.
Sometimes, yeah. But sometimes they are genuinely almost half-price. And the fact that Billy Elliot has survived largely, I think, on half-price ticket sales for 10 years... I mean, okay, in the first 2 years you probably couldn't get a half-price ticket, but after that you could. And the fact that it's managed to stay alive, and obviously it's broken even for 10 years, it wouldn't have been still playing, shows that it can be done. And I think if it can be done in London... I mean, my only argument for expensive ticket prices, high ticket prices, is to pay actors a decent wage, but actors are still not paid a decent wage but on average in London. And this is with ticket prices going up and up and up. Producers have no right to put ticket prices up unless they're passing on the profit to actors.
Well, wasn't there a big report a couple of years ago that all of the Matildas, they only paid £50 because that's what you pay child actors.
Child labour rates.
Child labour rates. And you think, okay, there you go. But
Well,
I would add something else. What I would argue what the theatre needs is to keep a certain number of tickets available for students, the elderly, the unemployed, good seats for low prices. And you should also, that's the thing is the Old Vic had a
Well, that's what the National's good for.
Yes, but the Old Vic has the policy of the under 25s getting the best seats for £12. But nonetheless, you need to have that for all shows because we need to get young people in to pick up the habit of going to the theatre. Because otherwise you will never acquire it. And I remember, as I'm German and from a country where theatre is subsidized, when I went to university, I could get the best available seats in the very famous theatre in my hometown, in Bochum, Schauspielhaus, with some of the greatest directors in German theatre history, were artistic directors throughout the last decades, for 8 marks back then. Okay, now that's quite a while ago, but nonetheless, you could get in and you could go to the theatre just as often as you went to the cinema because it was more or less equal in price. And that's not the case in London, in many theatres.
But we are much better than New York in the aspect of student pricing. And
yes, but of course...
We don't have the whole... I hate the term rush, because... That's so New York, to have a kind of rush policy. Here, you just turn up and, and I don't like what Sonia Friedman is bringing to the model here of having lotteries and this whole kind of exclusivity thing.
No,
if you haven't sold a seat, just sell it for half price, because an actor would rather perform to a full row than seats dotted it here and there and everywhere.
I agree. It's just that you can see that London is following New York in with all introduction of premium seats, which are utterly unnecessary for anyone.
Yeah.
With as you said, the lotteries, the rush. Some theatres may have the ticket policy. It's unnecessary, and of course they're also following with the way they raise prices. And that is something that, once again, I think is a very dangerous development that also will make it, this is what I really find frightening, will make it very difficult for young writers, young composers, young playwrights, librettists to get their work on. Because if you have to pay $20 million or even £5 million for a new show, you will go with something that you think will succeed, and that is usually... something that
that's been done before.
It's known. It's a brand, and I find it disheartening that the last 2 big British musicals, and we can talk about what still makes a show British or American, or whether there is any distinction anymore, like From Here to Eternity and Made in Dagenham, which had unproven composers, at least, and in the case...
Well, I wouldn't say David Arnold was an unproven
But he's
composer.
unproven in the field of musical
theatre.
theatre, and he's not a name. He's not like Elton John. He's not even like Gary Barlow.
But couldn't you say that From Here to Eternity at least had Tim Rice?
Yes, but Tim Rice, as a lyricist, will not bring in anyone. Especially if it's not the Lion King.
It's interesting
Part
how
2.
people rely on the composer more than the...
Yes, that's usually... It's partly
Maybe if he
because-
did From Here to Eternity with Elton John, it would have been a different...
Maybe, then at least... But I think also what
Still
I
sounded
found
like an
very
Elton John score.
irritating is that the reviews didn't support this. A lot of the reviews from Here to Eternity, and even more so from Made in Dagenham, were honestly really stupid. Didn't understand anything about
Here we are,
this.
reviewing reviews.
Of course... that's the other thing. In New York, you sometimes have everybody gushing in reviews, and you think those reviewers are just as ignorant and unknowledgeable as others. But at least they tend to support new work. It's not like in London, where if you are somebody and doing From Here to Eternity, you get not just stupid reviews, but you also get snide remarks, and you just think that is not helping.
I have to say that I thought, for example, Made in Dagenham, for whatever its limitations, was a better show than almost anything we saw in New York, except with the exception of An American in Paris. I would say as large-scale, big commercial musical. None of the shows that we saw on Broadway were as good as Made in Dagenham.
I think a bigger, better example to possibly say was a better show that you and I both enjoyed tremendously, and I saw it many times, was I Can't Sing.
Yes. Well, I don't think I Can't Sing was as good a show as Made in Dagenham, to be honest, but I think I Can't Sing was much better. If you take a show that's exactly in that category of something,
a 1920s British musical comedy,
trying to be modern, trying to be a musical comedy, it was much better than Something's Rotten. I mean, there's no comparison in my mind, and I have to say that. And it's not because I'm pro the British musical, but because my favourite, my notion of the great commercial musical is always Kander and Ebb. For me, they set the bar for commercial musicals. Sondheim sets the bar for musicals, period, if you're just judging quality, artistic quality. But Kander and Ebb set the bar. So they're both American. But having said that, very few Americans are living up anymore, and it's what we've said before, because of the producer problem.
Yes.
Speaking of Kander and Ebb, you also saw The Visit, didn't you?
Yes, we saw The Visit, which of course is based on a very famous play by Swiss playwright Friedrich Dürrenmatt.
Of course it is.
Definitely.
I know him
Should
well.
have mentioned there. Well, he was a big name in the 50s and 60s. Internationally, his play is still done a lot of times in Germany and.
It's like a ghost story from the cover.
Well, it is a very, very
Disney way.
dark story, and that Kander and Ebb had been working on.
And they make a light situation of it, do they?
Not quite,
No,
even though they try to hide the fact how dark it really is. It's a very simple setup. It's a Swiss town which has fallen on very hard times. Everyone's very
Well, they don't
poor.
tell you it's Swiss in this version.
But that's the original. And what happens is that a woman who was sort of chased out of town as being a slut and being a nuisance, Claire Zachanachian, is coming back. Claire Zachanachian is her original
Well,
name.
I think nowadays in American she's pronounced Zachanasian.
Whatever, her name is Claire, let's put it like this. Claire is now an old lady and is one of the richest people on earth. He has married wealthy several times, and everybody hopes she will come back and save the town from bankruptcy and will provide everyone with a good life. And Claire has come back, but Claire has an agenda. Claire wants revenge for the suffering that was afflicted on her when she was a young girl. And so she makes a rather striking offer. She promises everyone in town will get rich, very rich.
10
She will
billion
save it.
she's going to give them.
Yeah, 10 billion if, and that is the only condition she has, if they kill the man who seduced her, got her pregnant, and then helped chase her
The
out of
question is
town.
who done it?
No, you know who it
okay.
is. The question that is asked is the town willing to go that far, stoop that low, and accept the money and kill the man?
Yes.
And at first they say no. And
Come the end of Act 1, they say yes.
there is only one act now. Now, this is another interesting development. The Visit had been in the works for years when Fred Ebb died in 2004, and there have been several productions since. There has been one at the Signature Theatre
In 2008.
What was the one you saw? Because you've seen this before,
we
haven't
saw
you?
this same production in Williamstown.
And you said this will never go to Broadway.
Absolutely.
Yes, because it is a show that basically tells an audience who has paid $150 for a seat that you can buy everything for money, and that people...
Well, that's the American way, isn't it?
in
And
some
some people will do anything.
anything for money. And of course it is a dark show, because at the end, I don't think there's any surprise there, the town goes along with her plan and kills her former lover. What is astonishing about this production and this play is that the original Dürrenmatt play is fairly long. It's about 2 hours and 50 minutes. To be honest, I think it's a little bit too long for what it tries to say, as you can see where it's going right from the beginning. But the Broadway production has been co-conceived and directed by John Doyle, who, after having at first this mannerism of having everything with actor musicians, now decides that everything should be done without an interval by cutting it down to 19 minutes. He did that with Roadshow, the Sondheim
You
show.
also did it with the opening of the Olympic ceremony.
Then he did it with The Visit, which is now probably the only musical I know which, as a musical version, is much shorter than as a straight play. I think The House of Bernarda Alba is another one of those. by Michael John Accuser, which is
Well,
also
that's so
this
short
tragic.
it's just called Alba now.
Well, there you can say it's clearly without an interval so that audiences can't escape. But with A Visit, what you have is a show that...
The Scotsman Boys didn't have an interval either,
Yes,
did it?
but that, of course, knows, and there's a reason for that. But with A Visit, I think it's cut down too much. The problem is that now there is no moment in the show left where there is any doubt whether or not the town will follow, will accept the offer.
So there's no dramatic tension, there
There's
are no
no tension.
dramatic stakes.
They say, we will not do this at first. Claire has a wonderful line saying, I wait. And then immediately afterwards, people spend money. People start looking at her former lover with, clearly the intention of thinking about whether or not they can kill him without causing too much fuss. And so it moves very quickly from the offer to the end. And you think, well, that's not how the original play works.
There's no dramatic tension there.
You need, at least for a moment, to consider whether or not the town will have the honesty, will have the ethics of not accepting the thing.
So how was the one staged a couple of years ago done?
Well, I have seen a pirate DVD of this particular production, and it's a bit longer. I mean, it's about half an hour longer. It does have an interval. It has a few more numbers, including one wonderful dance number called the One-Legged Tango, which Claire, because Claire has a wooden leg. And it certainly has more scenes which are varied, and they're not so in the John Doyle production, where you actually see the townsfolk and their reaction to the offer. And that takes more time, and particularly with his family. There are scenes where there are lots of quarrels and fights. The other thing that's interesting, you see, is that what John Doyle tends to do, which he did with Roadshow, which can be seen as quite clever and modern, but in this context I think doesn't help, is he pares everything down so it's happening on one symbolic set. So we never really change location. We occasionally put some props onto the stage and you look as if you're in a car going for a drive, and occasionally it looks as if you're in somebody's house because suitcases are piled up. But actually in the original production, though it wasn't a realistic set, they did signify locations in more detail. And that, of course, gives you more dramatic specificity for each scene. So therefore, when the family are at home arguing about what their father should do, there is more tension. There certainly is more tension. The other thing that I think Doyle did, which I think is a terrible pity, and it may have been because Roger Rees really can't sing, he's not a great singer, is he's brought to the fore the young Claire and the young Anton, and the young lovers as they were 40 years before. And you see this, they dance a lot, but they also sing. Now, they are there as ghost figures in the original production, but they have been expanded hugely, I think, because Roger Rees can't really carry some of the big numbers.
Roger Rees plays the former lover, Anton. And in the 2008 production, Anton was played by George Hearn, who of course has a great voice. Roger Rees sort of got away with it in Williamstown, where he gave, I thought, a quite moving performance, even though he cannot sing. And he has since then dropped out of the role, and his understudy has now taken over. He gave a horribly one-note performance, croaking through whatever little song there was. And you of course think, well, the show also loses its balance if you have one star performance, a magnetic performance by Chita Rivera, who of course can sing and act, and then you have somebody who may be a fine actor but can't sing. If you have basically a two-hander in some ways, you can't have that. You can't have something out of balance. And John Doyle, as Robert has said, brings in the young lovers who are always around observing, sort of like the younger selves and follies. He also has them twirling around a coffin endlessly on stage, and I just thought that is a really stupid idea. The set looks magnificent when you first see it. It's a decrepit train station. It looks stunning, but as Robert has said, as it's used for everything and it never changes, you find it very confusing when they say, oh, this is where we meet in the forest, and you think, well, the set as great as it looks, in the end is more a hindrance than a help. And so...
It has to be said, though, because we've been very negative. It's a very good score. Occasionally, some of the songs are magnificent and very moving. And it's brilliantly acted by Chita Rivera and most of the cast, actually. Yes. And brilliantly played by Chita Rivera, who is totally in command of the stage. You realise, and I think this is the reason that the producers, in this case, did bring it to Broadway. I think they all knew they wouldn't make money. They all thought it might just break even, perhaps, at best. But, and it obviously doesn't cost as much as some of the shows to mount, but they're doing it as a tribute to Kander and Ebb because it's their the last show they wrote together.
But every show they put on recently is a last show.
Yes, but this really is. There's no more in their back in Kander's back pocket, and it's probably the last starring role Chita Rivera will play on Broadway at the age of 82.
So you felt quite honoured to see this piece?
Well, we had seen it last year in Williamstown. They hardly changed anything at all. And all of the stuff that I thought didn't work, it's in many ways very obvious in its symbolism. At the end, when she has collected the body of a former lover and leaves town, the people throw money around, yellow banknotes to make you realise that they all have been corrupted by money. But it is a very interesting show that I think should be expanded, and it's another show where you think, well, this would work perfectly at something like the Young Vic.
Or the Mini Chocolate Factory.
Mini Chocolate Factory, or even the National in a small-scale production, maybe starring Julia McKenzie. Someone like that. We have enough great actresses.
Imelda.
Well, Imelda is a little bit young. But on the other hand, I have to say that this may not be widely known, but there has been another musical version of the same play in Vienna recently, starring two of the biggest German / Dutch stars, Pia Dowers and Uwe Kröger, and they're both in their 50s. So if you cast both of them younger, it would work. But there is a lot there to cherish, and it's great to hear Kander and Ebb at their best at certain songs. I wouldn't say that the score is as great, or that the show as such will ever achieve the greatness of the Scottsboro Boys, which is a fantastic show. It's on the other hand, it's very dark, and maybe it would work better as a musical if they would fully embrace the darkness of
Turn the lights off.
Yeah.
Well, musically, where does John Kander go with the? I mean, what's his world of? What's his musical sound in this piece?
It sounds.
Is it jazz again?
No. It sounds a little bit to me like French chanson. I mean, the songs.
It's like Baker's Wife.
When you're young, and yes.
And Baker's Wife actually takes the fun part of French chanson.
Yeah.
This seems more like the existentialist dark ones.
Yeah. it's Piaf singing her most tragic songs. Yeah. And it does have a veil of nostalgia, but it's always undercut, as typically with Kander and Ebb. I think this is what's interesting, because when you look at some of the marketing material, some of the actors on some of the TV interviews are saying, oh, what's so wonderful is that Kander and Ebb took this very dark play about death and they've turned it actually into a play about love. Well, the lyric goes, when you're young, then you feel all this lovely joy, and when you're old, then you realise that when you're young, love, what is there that brings you death? Love and love alone. And it's actually, I mean, I'm paraphrasing very crudely, but what the song is actually about is that being totally in love leads to disaster.
In this case, leads to ruin.
Leads to ruin.
The only thing that can turn a person from an optimistic, happy human being into someone who's bitter and bent on revenge is love.
Does it sound like a Kander and Ebb score?
Definitely.
Does it have those?
Definitely. The minute it begins, you know you're in Kander and Ebb land. It's.
And there's one total Kander and Ebb song, which is Yellow Shoes.
Of course.
Which is when everybody is buying things. So yellow being gold.
On credit.
They're buying on credit, and they're all wearing lovely new yellow shoes, and they're all buying as much as they can. And of course, it's classic Kander and Ebb.
What we also saw, just as we're talking about Kander and Ebb, was a New York City Encore's production of one of their earliest musicals, Zorba, which is a show that has...
They wrote it just after Cabaret.
Yes, that came out in 1968.
Thought you were going to say Floor of the Red Menace for a second.
No, that was their first show, but it's one of those kind of... It's one of the few Cameron Ebb shows that completely has got away. There's 70 Girl 70s that nobody talks about, Woman of the Year, which is not much talked about, and then there's Zorba, which of course was based on an Oscar-winning film of the early 60s starring Anthony Quinn, Ellen Bates, Irene Papas. That was a huge hit back then, based on a novel by Kazantzakis, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature. It's all very prestigious. And Zorba opened in 1968 and has the distinction of being the very first musical to be called a concept musical by Martin Gottfried, who often claims he invented the term. And as it's hardly ever done, there were rumors for a while it might be brought back to Broadway with Antonio Banderas in the lead role. Anchors decided to put it on semi-staged, as they often do, with some very famous people in the cast. Mary Mazzie plays, what is she called? The leader of the chorus? The chorus leader. And then you have, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Robert Cuccioli, who was in Jekyll and Hyde.
Such a credit.
Well, I think it's Cuccioli.
John Turturro.
John Turturro as the leading character. Now that is unusual because John Turturro is not known as a singer. And he doesn't seem to have the Anthony Quinn quality of being this alpha male, super confident, sort of macho guy, and they put it on and got very bad reviews for their production. Amazingly, not just for the production. Everybody said that John Turturro was miscast. He was, but he still gave an intelligent performance. But a lot of people found the piece itself very problematic and irritating and didn't like it one bit. And once again, I have to say, critics tend to be stupid. This piece has its big problems, and I think they all go back to the novel. It's set in Greece. A young Englishman in the novel, a young American in the musical, comes to Greece to open a mine that he inherited.
Would be an American, wouldn't it?
Yes. And he meets this Greek sort of drifter called Zorba, who is sort of a force of life and knows how to handle everything.
Especially women.
Especially women
it's a very
in a very
sexist
macho
show.
way. And Zorba takes up with a French elderly lady who sort of hopes to marry him to have one last piece of glory.
And that's the one member of the cast I think you didn't mention.
Oh, yes.
It had Zoe Wanamaker in it, which was a great surprise because, of course, you have a great British actress, well, she's by birth American, who's no real experience of appearing in musicals, but she does give a marvellous performance.
Yes. The young American falls in love with the Greek widow, who's very beautiful, and everyone in town whistles after her, but she falls in love with the American, has an affair with him. Unfortunately, there is a young man in town, a teenager, who is desperately in love with her. When he realizes that she hasn't chosen him but the American, he commits suicide, and his father then decides to kill the widow. Sort of an honor killing, which has always irritated me and I found very upsetting, because what has that poor woman done? She fell in love with someone else and so she has to be killed. She is killed. The whole town watches, nobody helps her in the film. In
and
the
they
musical,
steal all her property.
Yes, and they steal all her
Then
property.
she comes back and says, I'll give $10 billion to anyone who
Not
can...
quite, but
Not yet.
the musical changes that because Zorba tries to prevent the killing, he doesn't succeed. There's a lot here that is very problematic, from the portrayal of women, it's a very sexist society, from the portrayal of Greeks as greedy, from the portrayal of Americans as being afraid to live.
Well, I think, God, to be fair, it's not just
Mediterraneans as being, the force of life.
But it's not just Greeks who are portrayed as greedy. Again, this is a dark novel, and it's a dark play. And so what Cameron Ebb are doing fairly typically is showing human cupidity.
Yes,
in
but in the end you realise that nobody in his right mind would film the novel now, and nobody would put this on as it is. Now, there is still something very intriguing about the play that the production at Ancost couldn't manage to show, and that is that it is Terror Prince, who directed it originally, coming straight from Cabaret on his way to Company Follies and Sondheim in the 70s, conceived this as a concept musical, meaning that the basic concept was that people were sitting around a fire.
It's a bouzouki bar.
And are telling a story. Everybody steps in and helps tell the story, so it's a completely different way of doing it, because the Anchors production was staged realistically, with a realistic set that unfortunately had the orchestra halfway in the set.
So it sounds like when Chicago was first done to when Chicago was...
Yeah, but Chicago, even as a revival, is still heavily stylized. But this tried for something more realistic, and you think you can't do that with us.
And which was really rather bizarre, because it was a concert staging.
Yes.
So why try to be realistic?
But the problem, of course, then is with certain characters. Now, Mary Mazzie was brought in to sing a lot of the great songs, and she plays the lead of the chorus. If you're sitting around in a bar and telling a story, it makes sense for somebody to step in and continue the story. But in a realistic setting, Marion Mazzie's character
Pops up from the middle
of nowhere, sings a song and disappears, and has no connection with anyone else on stage. Now, it also didn't help that great performer that she is, and she gave a wonderful performance. She sang beautifully. Marion Mazzie is about as Greek as Princess Diana, and in a black wig and a black dress that made her look like Morticia Adams from the Addams Family, just seemed at the wrong place at the wrong time. But whatever she had to do, she did magnificently. The cast was very good, trying very hard, but as a realistically staged show, it doesn't work on any level. I wonder whether it would work if you do it once again as a concept show. But in this way, it only exposed what doesn't work about the material without highlighting what actually works very well. On the other hand, I have to say this is probably the one musical that is the bravest of them all, by opening with the line, "Life is what you do while you're waiting to die." Now, if that doesn't tell you that this is going to be a bleak evening, I don't know.
But the thing is, one must also say, this is one of Kander and Ebb's best scores. It's a remarkably good score. And it's the book that lets the show down. However you interpret it. The score is wonderful. It's wonderful pastiche Greek music, Bouzouki-stan music.
Well, maybe at times a little bit too much.
Perhaps, but I think it's a wonderful score, and it does have an enormous number of fans.
It's a shame Kander Ebb only known really for Cabaret and less so Chicago. I mean,
I think actually nowadays it would probably be the other way around, because Chicago is now the longest running American musical on Broadway and the longest running American musical in Britain, and of course people
and a recent-ish film
and the film, which was a big hit. Cabaret is done often, partly because you can also do it quite cheaply, and it can tell you it's done literally thousands of times in Germany every year.
Oh, that's interesting.
But and of course certain songs are very famous. But yes, it's true, because they have done so much more. And even the ones that are branded flops or were regarded as problematic, like Steel Pier, which was done in a small-scale production at the Union, have a lot going
Menier,
for it.
wasn't it?
No, Curtains was at the...
Steel
Pier was done at the Union Theatre.
Okay.
There's another great show that hasn't been done professionally called Curtains, which is a lot of fun.
Wonderful show.
It's a wonderful show that was done at Arts Educational Centre, but you could.
I saw it at Guildhall.
Yeah, so it could be done brilliantly. Scottsboro Boys is fantastic. That was actually a surprise hit here in London. Well, at least it did fairly well. But there is so much. I would love to see Flora the Red Menace. I think that could be interesting.
I saw it at the Rose and Crown in Islington.
Oh, there you go.
A horrible venue which I never wish to go to again, but it was interesting to see the show.
Yeah, no, that's great. No,
I saw a good production of The Orange Tree, actually, 20 years ago.
Oh. Well, so there is.
I think we have to do an episode about Kander Ebb, because there's so much more to them than just the three C's, Cabaret, Curtains and Chicago.
Yeah.
I did love the musical of musicals, the musical.
Yes.
When they open a cabaret in Chicago.
Yes.
Which sums all up Kander Ebb.
Yes, and of course what you haven't even mentioned yet are the great songs they've written for films. You know, New York, New York, which is probably the most famous song they ever wrote, for that misbegotten Martin Scorsese musical. They've written some great songs for the Funny Girl sequel, Funny Lady, which has some wonderful songs in there. So there is so much to Kander Ebb.
And of course we haven't mentioned Kiss of the Spider Woman, which is their third great show, I think, which has been successful, but not quite in the same way as Cabaret in Chicago.
So there is a lot there.
I want to go back in time and end on the 20th century.
Yes, and the 20th century is...
The Cy Coleman musical.
Cy Coleman and Continent Green, it couldn't be more American than this, could it?
But of course the surprise about this show, we must say, when we mention Cy Coleman, is Cy Coleman's known as a jazz composer, and this is a pastiche operetta
score. It's a show that opened in 1978 and got not the greatest reviews, and was always It's probably best known for having a very problematic star, Madeleine Kahn, who dropped out fairly quickly. I don't know, claiming exhaustion or whatever.
Pushed off that
People
train quicker than you could.
say that she couldn't deal with the demands of a Broadway performance 8 times a week. She's, of course, a very famous comedian, probably best known for the Mel Brooks films. She appeared in Young Frankenstein. It's a great example. But she was then replaced by Judy Kay, and the show came to London
With Julia
McKenzie.
A production which I saw,
with direction by Harold Prince, and it's often regarded as one of those shows that is famous for having a fantastic set, great staging, and never having
steam rising up from the orchestra,
and having quite achieved its potential in the original production for various reasons. And for years it has been said that it should be revived with Kristin Chenoweth, who seemed to be a natural for the major role of Lily.
And she is.
She is. This has been directed by Scott Ellis, very badly, I have to say. And it is a very funny evening because a lot of the songs are brilliant. Because Kristin Chenoweth is a brilliant comedian singer. Peter Gallagher is very funny.
I must say the role absolutely fits Kristin Chenoweth in every way, because she has to sing in an operetta style, which of course she can do brilliantly,
and she can stand it up.
She has to be comic in a quite a camp style, which she can do brilliantly, and it fits her like a glove.
Yes. Unfortunately, what surrounds those performers isn't as good as those performers. Let me give you an example of what I found is really weird about this show. Is there are 2 major songs where Lily is sort of reading a script or reliving a moment on stage, where she switches between being in the present and imagining herself in a film or on stage in a play, and looking back at when she performed in a play. And both times, if you listen to the score, you imagine the actress on stage sort of switching between the 2 modes, present and past, just being on her own on stage. Well, in the Broadway production, they stage the future
past
play or the past play, and you think that is a lot of energy, a lot of set costume for nothing, because it would be just as funny with Kristin Chenoweth standing with a script in her hand and switching from past and present.
Do you think they might think the audience might not get it, though?
No, they think that they want to take every opportunity for extra spectacle.
Yes, I think that's what
Which
it is.
I approve of.
Yes, but in this case it's simply not necessary. And the spectacle is actually not that great. Now that the set is great, the costumes are quite nice, but
that's something where projections might... I mean, if you were to go with that concept, that's where
even that,
yes, you could do it much more economically.
Even that isn't necessary, because it's all written in the songs. Right. Comden and Green and Cy Coleman know exactly what they were doing, and you could. It's sometimes just as funny having somebody in front of a curtain doing that, because the song works. It's,
the other thing I
not
must
trusting
say,
the material.
As we're talking about spectacle and set, the Hal Prince production was famous for the beauty. It was Tony Welton, I think, for the beauty of the Art Deco design, because of course the film The 20th Century was based on the famous Trans-American train, which was called The 20th Century, and it was a beautiful Art Deco style steel and chrome train. And I do remember, the thing that you remember most, I remember Julia McKenzie, but I actually even more vividly remember the way in which this Art Deco train was conceived and staged. And in this production, I knew, and it wasn't realistic, but you got the most incredible impression of a train travelling on stage, and you saw it from different angles, and it was all silver and glass and chrome, and it was a dream, as the 20th Century, as the original train was meant to be. In this production...
I've seen a picture of it, looks like a robot.
Well, in this production, I knew...
Like a 1950s Forbidden Planet robot.
I knew the minute the overture came to an end, as the curtain rose, I saw a bit of cardboard or plywood set diagonally across the stage, meant to represent one of the carriages of the train, and I knew that the whole production would be lacking in style, because that signified everything that's wrong for me with the production.
Yeah. We have to point out one thing, that in many ways on the 20th Century fits perfectly into what's happening on Broadway now, as it is based on a film. which in turn is based on a play. The play is by Ben Hecht, Charles MacArthur, and Bruce Milholland, I think. The film that was made out of that play is one of the most famous screwball comedies of the 1930s, made in 1934, I think, by Howard Hawks, starring the great Carole Lombard and John Barrymore. And that, of course, this is one of the first attempts in the 70s to musicalize a film/play that was very famous, and so of course it fits in with An American in Paris and a lot of the other stuff that is happening on Broadway and in the West End right now. I agree with Robert that the set seems a mistake. Even worse is that there are certain moments when the ensemble comes in with certain, what are those, cutouts that are supposed to represent
Windows of
train
the train.
windows, and step behind them and roll them around on stage, which looks really like the worst school play that you've ever can imagine. And
Tacky
even
and lacking
worse,
in
even
taste.
worse than that is the ensemble is mugging from beginning to end. The only time I had a similar, where my heart sank similarly, was when the opening minutes of Finding Neverland in Boston, where the actors came on and they were all so over the top that you just realized this can never work. And here you have great performances in the lead. And we also should mention the wonderful woman, Tony Award winner, what is her name?
Mary Louise
Pyle, who plays the religious nut wonderfully. She does this really well. She has a marvelous song called "I Know There's Dirty Doings Going On," which is Kendra and Ebb at their pure. Kendra and Ebb, I'm getting confused here. Comden and Green at their best.
Their wittiest.
At their wittiest. And
It has Andy Carl.
Is that Andy Carl?
who's
It
just played
has
Rocky.
Margolin Breaker, yes. And they're all funny.
And Peter Gallagher, who gives
Peter
a good
Gallagher has a
performance.
wonderful performance.
I mean,
and it's perfectly
the
cast.
problem, I saw Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown recently, and what I did appreciate about it was that it was a good effort of doing a farce within the musical,
Yes.
which is something that never really...
It's very
works.
difficult to do. It's very
Does
difficult
this
to do.
succeed?
This is much better written. than
Yes,
Woman
it's
on the
much
Verge
better
of a
written.
Nervous
Actually, has
Breakdown.
songs that you remember. In many ways, it is wittier. And it gives the people on stage a real opportunity to showcase their comic talents. As much as I adore Tamsin Greig in Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, she actually made this work not because it's in the script, but because she's such a wonderful performer.
You left out humming her.
Yes, and in a way you just think, well, what about great performers such as Willemijn Verkijk playing the lawyer in The Woman on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, that not leaving any mark, not because she's not good, but because she has no material. But here you have some great funny songs. The score may not be everybody's cup of tea. I've spoken to some people who don't like it at all. But as a showcase for the talents of the stars, it's great, partly because you have the feeling coming out that all the funny bits come from the performers, not because the director helped them with that.
But the other thing is, it is so well crafted. The
Yes.
show is so well
Yes.
crafted as a piece of writing.
Well, Cy Coleman is arguably, I think, one of the best Broadway composers
Yes.
Oh, he
of all
definitely...
time.
And Comden and Crean are the best lyricists, librettists,
Definitely
almost of all time.
Yes, and certainly the best when it comes to New York and show business, because they don't quite work when they move outside show business. Just listen to A Better Not, A Doll's Life, the misbegotten sequel to A Doll's House. But when they work with stories
Hollywood
that
or
are about
Broadway.
Hollywood, Broadway, show business, they know what they're writing, and
So,
they're very funny.
so what's the story of On the 20th Century?
On the 20th century begins with a famous American director who had a major flop and whose career seems to go down the drain, realizing that he's on the same train from Chicago to
And
New
he could
York
have
as
more.
his former star, Lily
Garland.
Lily Garland, who used to be Mildred Plotka before he turned her
Are we
into a
seeing a
star.
parody
and
of
showed
Judy
it-
Garland here? No?
No.
Just a coincidence.
And of course, he realized that as she's now become a big Hollywood star, if he could lure her back to the stage, his financial problems would be over. And of course, she doesn't want to, because they used to have an affair and they fell out. And so he has just the 16 hours from Chicago to New York to convince her that the new play that he hasn't written yet, and that he doesn't have any money for, is the best opportunity he'll have to prove that she's a real actress.
And of course, this is exactly the same plot as the film, the original film,
Yes.
and the original stage version. It's very well plotted.
And of course, one of the things that you have, it's Ben Hecht, who has always been a great screenwriter and playwright. But of course, what makes it so funny is that both of them are larger-than-life theatrical personalities. They're both given to acting out their lives, to exaggerating everything, to see an audience when none exists. And so they're all about acting their fantasies out and trying to persuade the other by acting things that don't happen. He even goes so far as to fake his own death. And so it's a show about showbiz personalities who are larger than life and very, very funny.
Thank you, Olaf. Thank you, Robert, for sharing your
Thanks for
views on
having us.
Broadway. You're very lucky to go and see all these shows. I'm sure our listeners are all jealous.
We
But
were lucky to see most of them.
yeah, well, you'll still get. I mean, I hear Something Rotten is coming here.
Well, I'll be very interested to see how Something Rotten does here. I think Kinky Boots will do quite well because I think with a British cast, it may be very, very funny. I never wanted to see it on Broadway because I think it needs an English cast because it's so much about,
Nottingham or wherever it's.
Yes, Nottingham. But I think I'd be very surprised if Something Rotten works in London.
Yeah, if even shows that were funnier like Spamalot couldn't find an audience. And the Book of Mormon, well, of course they artificially keep ticket demands up by only releasing tickets.
Yes, but it is a big success.
Of course, and it's also in a small theatre. But, if they can find a small theatre, it might work for a while. But The Driver Chaperone flopped badly. Spamalot wasn't a big hit. The producers ran for 2 years, but never was as successful as on Broadway. This is the kind of comedy that doesn't necessarily work in England as well as it does in the United States. A musical comedy is always a bigger problem traveling. So we'll see. But I'm quite sure the English critics won't be as kind as the American were to Something Rotten. They might enjoy Kinky Boots more.
Thank you very much for listening, and we'll have you on again soon. Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olaf.
Thank you, Nick.
And goodbye.